So thank you for joining us, Rachel. My name is Lynell Hodge. I am a practitioner scholar who is centrally located at UCF, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my area of expertise is in vicarious trauma and stress response, mostly in educators.
All right. And my name is Michelle Crozier. I am an epidemiologist by training. I worked for several years in a local county health department here in Florida as the infectious disease epidemiologist, and decided I would go back for my PhD and finished that in 2017. And it was through my dissertation where I looked at the impact of PTSD on hypertensive disorders of pregnancy among all active duty military women from post 9/11 up through 2008. And I really got interested in trauma, toxic stress, and was grappling with my own issues and learned about the ACEs study from a senior faculty member who'd been on my committee, and just started to get involved in that research, and then learned about the CRC network in 2019 and attended that first conference and have been involved ever since. So, and I'm currently a lecturer in the School of Global Health Management and Informatics at UCF. I'm at the downtown campus. And that's the initiative that was a joint venture between Valencia College and UCF to reach the Paramore community. And so the college really values my work with the network due to that reason. And so I'm excited to be here. Lynell, you want me to walk through the agenda, or do you want to?
I think, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So today what we're going to do is walk you through the entire process from survey design, specifically for nonprofits, and then we'll kind of lay the groundwork of how you get from the survey to the data collection, to the data analysis. Then we're going to move into a case study so you can practice what you learned today. And so hopefully we are going to share the whole life cycle of the process. So then you have a good kind of tester or teaser of how to collect data information and then also analyze it and then tell the story based on your analysis. So hopefully the next 2 hours, we can do a quick and dirty, but also it'll be very developmental and very hands-on training.
Awesome, thank you. I think the next slide is the one where we have our photos. So yeah. There we are.
Me no glasses. Now I need my glasses.
I need them when staring at the computer screen.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit. Well, do you want me to introduce the survey design, and then you can talk about the background? Because I just want to say that we called this session, I sent a survey out, now what? And it may not make sense to you why we're covering a little bit about survey design and survey questions, but in our experience, we have found that oftentimes nonprofits or smaller organizations get frustrated with the data that they collect, and it doesn't quite meet the needs of the agency who's requesting that information because they didn't necessarily ask the right questions. So, and it's really hard to ask the right questions. So it's no judgment on them, on the individuals who wrote it, but it can just be frustrating in the end after you've dedicated all of that time and energy to doing it and you don't get what you expected out of it. So we just wanted to start a little bit with the basics of questions and give you some resources to have in your back pocket the next time you actually have to design questions, or the next time you get frustrated with the results that you're getting, and maybe you want to redesign some questions that you're asking. So that's why we put this in a presentation about data analysis.
Yeah, and it hopefully it's helpful, because we didn't want to assume the skill level of all of the attendees, and hopefully, if it's something that you already know, this will just be a refresher. And if you're not aware of it, then it might be give you a little bit of an aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we are talking about surveys in general, the reason you would deploy or utilize a survey is really to make sure to ask a question and to get information back. And so typically what you will see in survey time periods is that you're trying to understand satisfaction, effectiveness, if there are gaps in services, or there's something that is not making sense, and a survey will help you contextualize why a task isn't connecting with like your customer base or your population that you're working with. So it's really to target a population. So sometimes what we'll see is that your survey might be too broad, right? You think you need to know all of the things about your population, but you really need to be very clear on who and what is it that you need to collect information about, and why is it important. And you structure the survey around that population and what information that you want to pull from them. And then we'll spend some time to talk about the different types of ways that you can engage getting that knowledge in terms of how you structure your questions. So surveys are exploratory. So like you're exploring to learn something or understand something, explain something. And sometimes it takes you in a totally different direction, because you might anecdotally know the information, but once you collect the information, it tells you a different story. And then if it does tell you a different story, then you can describe it based on how you analyze the information. So in some ways, you want to make sure that the way you have structured your survey it's not so narrow that it confirms what you already know, but helps you learn about why this thing is happening. So in terms of survey, I think people typically think about it in a very specific, surveys in a very specific way, but really there are several different types of surveys that you can deploy to collect data. And really, you should choose the appropriate survey based on your time and your audience. So when I say that is, if you're trying to understand employee satisfaction, a traditional questionnaire might be appropriate, but also a focus group could be appropriate, because then you can collect some of the qualitative information to interpret data. Similarly with interviews. But say you're looking at like an event, a poll might be a better way to leverage using a survey, because it can give you quick information as it's happening. So really, when you're selecting the type of survey, you should keep the audience in mind and the time frame. So do you need the information back in the moment, or you need to collect the information in the moment? Or are you able to collect it over time? Or do you need to do it like, say, a post-survey conference is something that we see very often, because you want to monopolize on the experience as the conference ends, so it's still fresh in someone's mind. But you could also use comment cards, which is collecting, again, over time, but that you might not collect enough information. So you need to make sure that the appropriateness of the survey fits your time frame and your audience. So when we think about the types of questions that people ask, I think we typically see surveys leaning on the open-ended question. And that's really asking the participant or the respondent to explain their understanding of something. And the question doesn't necessarily lead or answer it for them, but it helps them understand that there's something that you want to know and they're filling in the blanks. Multiple choice, on the other hand, you're giving them specific things to choose from, and that selection informs additional information. Now, in terms of rating or Likert scales, that's usually, the traditional very satisfied, dissatisfied, or more likely, less likely. And again, all of these survey question types are structured in order to tell you something and should be leveraged to support the answer that you're collecting. So ranking is another type of survey question that you would use to understand priority or desire. And so this gives your respondents an opportunity to move information up and down so they can show you what their priorities are. And that ranking, when you look at the mean or the average of that, it tells you, well, what your audience base, your customer base, your target audience base is prioritizing. So you use rank in that way. And then the matrix, right, is combining multiple choice and Likert scale. So it sets up the question a little bit differently, because in this context, the question is closed. It's not a closed-ended question, because you're saying that this is important, or this question, and here are the options for this question. And then you use the Likert scale to tell you which one of these multiple choices are important. So you use the matrix. I think sometimes people use it to truncate a survey, but it really should only be used if it doesn't lead the respondents, right? So you use it in a way to make sure that you're grouping information in a logical way, but it also doesn't just reinforce what you already know. Any questions about this first half?
No, thank you.
Okay, great.
All right. So I'm just going to review a few best practices for item writing. Whole books have been written about this, so this is very much a crash course. But first and foremost, as with anything else in life, don't reinvent the wheel. Odds are there's a validated survey out there that you can either obtain for free or at very little cost. And really, if you have to pay a nominal fee to buy the rights to use a survey that's already in existence and validated, it's well worth the cost. It's very difficult to write your own questions because, like I said a few slides ago, you think you're asking for the information that you need, but then it turns out you haven't really asked for that information. Your questions aren't as valid as you'd hoped. And it happens to all of us. But oftentimes, even if a survey, items for a survey are paywalled, are behind a fee, if you contact the authors of the article who developed the instrument, they will often allow nonprofits and smaller organizations to use their instruments for free, especially since you'll cite them and give them recognition when you discuss it, because as long as you aren't using it for research and what could kind of be seen as personal
Profit.
interest, profit, personal interest related to your career growth, you're using it for nonprofit purposes to really help people, they will just send it to you for free. Another thing that is important to consider, and I think I heard someone mention this earlier in our general session related to something completely different, but consider the reading level of your target audience. So it's really easy to put a lot of smart people in a room together and you write these fantastic questions, but you need a master's degree to understand them. So you have to really consider who is your target audience. Is this survey going to go out to other members of the network who we consider probably to have a higher reading level than the general public? So if we were going to send a survey out to just the general public, we would need to think about reducing the reading level a little bit. And it's lower than you think. Lynell, I don't know if you have seen a recent estimate of the recommended reading level. I have, last I saw, it was somewhere around the 7th grade level.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Is it still that? Okay. Mm-hmm. So Word offers some tools that'll quickly analyze the estimated reading level, and you can just use that to take a look at it.
And just to support Michelle's point about why it is beneficial to use a validated survey, it's because that means they've, for the most part, worked out the kinks. So you'll be able to collect the information and there's not a lot of guesswork. So it's helpful that it's already validated, because what you don't want to have happen is that you have this beautiful survey and then you have to throw out a lot of questions because the questions are pulling and pushing on each other and essentially cancel each other out.
Mm-hmm. And it can be very complex to validate a survey. Mm-hmm. There's some statistics that I can't even do to fully validate items. And so I always look to see if something already exists before I start writing my own questions. So, when you are, I was just going to say one last thing on there. When you are either thinking of the actual survey items or the rest of the text on your survey, your introduction, your transitions, your closing, in addition to thinking about the reading level of your audience, you really want to use clear and precise words, phrases, and sentences. So don't use ambiguous language. And when you are writing or selecting items for your survey, you want to make sure that this carries through to the response options and that they're using non-judgmental language. So this is, again, why using a validated instrument is so helpful, because someone else has already done all this work, or pull from the US Census Bureau or other validated government surveys if you are trying to choose demographic questions that really get to the point of what you're trying to ask and are phrased in a non-judgmental way. Okay, now I'm ready for the next slide.
All right.
And some general guidelines based on my experience working with nonprofits and just formatting the survey and thinking about the flow. You want to begin your survey by asking the most important questions at the beginning. So what is it that you really need to learn from the people that you're sending the survey to? And to put those questions at the beginning. And then you want to put the questions that would be nice to know but aren't necessary towards the end, especially if you would like to ask questions that are somewhat sensitive but not too integral to the purpose of your survey. So a prime example of a question that you don't necessarily need to know in a lot of cases, but that people consider extremely sensitive, is income. So if you do not need to know someone's income, but you put it towards the beginning of your survey, what can happen is people get to that question, say it's question number 3, you haven't asked them anything important to the information you need to get out of them. They answer questions 1 and 2 and get to that income question and close the survey. So if it's not part of your purpose, put it at the end, because then if they decide to leave the survey when they get to that question, you've already collected the information that you really need from them. So yeah, you lose some additional nice information, but it doesn't derail your project. Again, use response categories that are less threatening. So if you are asking about income, and knowing the exact amount or exact range, $10,000 range, isn't important, vitally important to your project, you could ask something like, do you make above $20,000? So do you make below it? You could ask for their household size and do a calculation related to the federal poverty level. So there's some ways that you can ask this in a less offensive way, a less threatening way, depending on the purposes of your survey. And so the next few slides include scans from a book I have called Designing and Conducting Health Surveys. They put together a nice table in this book that I wanted to share with everyone called Do's and Don'ts. So I won't go over all of these, but you'll have it as a reference. And so they go through very practical formatting and item writing tips. So for example, you see in the do column over to the left, 1A says assign numbers to each question. And then over to the right in the don't column, it says don't leave off the question number. But they give great tips for how to align responses, how to number them. For example, you can see down at the bottom, number 4, it says use consistent numerical codes and formats. So they have yes, no, don't know, and their response numbers 1, 2, and 8 are formatted in the same column. It's very easy to see, versus I have seen this done and made the recommendation to change it where the same question is asked, but the response categories are listed across the same row or the same line, like you see 1 yes, 2 no, 3 don't know. And it's just a little bit more confusing for the person taking it to fill it out that way. But you can see, I'm sure your eye is drawn to the left-hand column because everything is aligned and it's very easy to read. And so, Lynell, if you just want to kind of flip through these slides, so a little at a time. Another, it just more tips. You can see it gives you an example of how to lay on a matrix. It's just, this is very, very handy. I've referred to this numerous times, and so I thought that this would be handy for you out in the field. And of course, you have the information if you really want to buy the book. It goes into great detail about how to analyze these items and rate them. And some of it is over my head, but I very much like this. I like this table in the book. So hopefully that helps you as a reference. And feel free to email either one of us, email me. If you have any questions as you're trying to do this or aren't sure how to apply it, I'm happy to, and I'm sure I speak for Lynell also, we're both happy to work through it with you and at least brainstorm, because we don't necessarily have all the answers.
And I don't know if, look, it showed. I also have this book as well. And this one is specific to doing internet surveys because the methodology is slightly different. So this is also a good resource, and I can eventually share that resource, the title, in the chat as well.
Excellent. Yes. I forgot you showed that to me when we were getting set up.
Okay.
All right. And so I think that you probably said that then on purpose to transition into our next slide about distributing your survey. And as Lynell said, there's some differences when you're formatting it electronically. SurveyMonkey is just one of several different options that you have to use a software for a relatively low price that makes it very easy to build these questions, because they've already integrated a lot of the tips from these books. And so we both really recommend using something like this to help you rather than just trying to create a form completely on your own to send out. Another thing that you can do is build your survey in SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, but Qualtrics is more expensive for a small organization. And then use those questions in a Word document or something if you're in a position where you absolutely have to pass out the survey in paper format, but it can help you at least get the alignment right, get the formatting correct. SurveyMonkey does offer cost discounts, 25% discounts on their I believe all of their team plans, and you apply every year. It does not take them long to get back to you with their decision about that. I think you just have to supply them basic information and your nonprofit designation tax form, and then you could get 25% off of $25 a month. So I'm not a salesperson for SurveyMonkey at all, but I talk to nonprofits who say we're not going to be able to afford to have software like this. And so you can see that it really isn't that much money every month, especially with this discount. But yeah, I see Rachel says they use Qualtrics at the college. We use it too. So it's just a little more robust than SurveyMonkey, but it is also more expensive. You pay for that additional support and additional features that they have built into it. But this is a great tool for electronic surveys, but I know many nonprofits do have to hand out paper surveys. And so you can, if you don't use SurveyMonkey, then you have the tips from the book. We just looked over and you'll have Lynell's, but we won't have Lynell's book. You'll have the citation from Lynell's book too.
Yeah.
Go find it on your own. All right. Next slide. Thank you. So what if you wrote your own questions? Well, you need to pilot test your questions first. And you can do this by just asking a small group of experts or professionals in the field to take the survey. You should prepare the survey all the way to final draft form before you do this. So get to the point where you feel the survey is ready to go to the target audience, and send it to your experts the same way you would be distributing it to your target audience. Ask them to take the survey and ask them also to note anything that they have questions about as they're answering it, any confusion, any comments about how they feel someone could misinterpret the question or how they interpreted the question, and then integrate all of their feedback into the survey. And you're probably not going to be validating it because, like I said, that's a whole higher level process with a lot of statistics. A nonprofit, small organization isn't going to have that capability, but at least you can gain feedback from experts in the field and make sure that you have other eyes on it and other input from people who may be working in a little bit different environment. So you can feel pretty confident by the time it goes out to your target audience that your questions are as valid as it's possible for you to make them. You're going to collect the information that you intend to collect. So I think we forgot to take out time to put this knowledge to the test. We're going to talk a little bit more about data analysis and data types before we let you loose into the sample data that we have and the grant case study. So a little bit about numbers. So yay, aren't you excited? I think this is the point in the class that I teach in epidemiology every semester about data and data analysis, that their eyes glaze over and I have to throw candy bars at them to keep them awake. But we basically have two major types of data that we deal with: continuous data and discrete data. And it's important for us to go over this very basic piece because the kind of statistics that you'll want to calculate depend on the type of data you collected. So continuous data is data that can take on any value between the minimum and the maximum. So think of age. You can be 47 years old and 274 days. So your age can really take on any value in a range between 0 all the way to whatever the max age is. So other examples are height, weight, your cholesterol level, and any type of value like that. In my field, epidemiologists love to categorize things. So I work with discrete data a lot. So discrete data can only take on a limited number of values or categories. So think red, green, orange. And there's a couple of different types of discrete data that we can have: ordinal or nominal. And the way to remember them is that ordinal data, that in ordinal data, the categories have an order. So like the number of ACEs. So the number of ACEs from 0 to 4 to 5 to 6, their order matters because 1 is worse than 0, 2 is worse than 1, etc. A Likert scale would also be ordinal data because someone who replies deeply dissatisfied means something compared to someone who replied extremely satisfied. So with ordinal variables, order matters. So that's the way to remember it. The other type are nominal variables. So like the color example I gave, the categories don't have an order. You can put them in any order and it doesn't mean anything relative to the other ones. So ethnicity, sex, race, colors. So I always blank when I try to think of different examples like this type of car.
State.
Yeah, exactly. Any type of discrete data where the order doesn't matter. So in my field, we basically call all of these categorical variables, the nominal data. Okay. Thank you. And so you can see that the common descriptive statistics that we would calculate to summarize our data in a report are specific to the type of data that you're analyzing. So if we have continuous data, so age and years, weight, height, then we would most likely calculate the mean and report the standard deviation associated with that. However, we can also look at the median and mode. So the mean is just the average. The median is the midpoint of the data. So you might want to look at the median if you have outliers. So this means everybody in your group seems to be between the ages of 25 and 40, but then you see somebody, a couple of people at the very high end. So then it jumps to 72 and 75. So this may make your mean or your average a little bit higher than if you didn't include them. So the median will give a better picture of the true middle of your age value. And then the mode is just the number that occurs the most times. So you won't always have a mode. And so then when we look at ordinal variables, so order matters, so like the number of aces, so we can calculate the mean and standard deviation. So you would assign a value to each level of the ordinal variable. So 0 aces is equal to 0, 1 is equal to 1, 2 equal to 2. And you could calculate overall for everybody who responded the mean number of aces reported, and then include the standard deviation with that, which is just the spread of the data. You can also calculate a proportion or a percentage with that. So what percent of people had 0 aces, what percent had 1, what percent had 2. So a couple different ways you can report it. And then for nominal variables or just categorical variables, the only option we have for those is proportion or percent. And just remember, all continuous data can be categorized. And so if you're wondering whether it would be better to ask a question on your survey as a continuous, that would give you continuous data versus categorical, just remember this. You can always categorize continuous variables, but you can't go the other way. So it may be better to ask in a way that gives you continuous data that you group yourself. And then, of course, you can always calculate ratios. So you might want to calculate the number of males to females in your data. But that's basically the type of descriptive statistics you'll be calculating based on surveys for nonprofits and small organizations. All right, then you also will probably want to include a couple of figures. And there are recommended types of graphs depending on the type of data that you have. And So if you're looking at ordinal data, like the number of aces, you can look at a bar chart. So the proportion for each ace. You could put it in a pie chart, the same thing, but just a different way to look at that. If you have nominal categorical data, bar charts again, because you're calculating a proportion. But if you're showing a change, maybe over time, you can use a line chart. So I always tell my students that if you are looking at trends over time, the line chart is usually the best option for you. But depending on the story you want to tell, you could also use a bar chart. When we start to get into relationship data, so this is usually continuous data, you can look at it in a line chart or a scatter plot, which is easily calculated in Excel. And thank you for showing the mouse over the example on the bottom. It just shows us, you're graphing the value of a variable. You're looking at the relationship between two variables. And so the dot is the value. And you can just see in general, whether there's a positive trend, negative trend between them. Maybe it's a completely different type of trend that you see. And I think that we've also shown examples of the other types of charts. So we got bar charts and pie charts in the bottom, but this is a handy table to use and refer to if you're trying to figure out what is the best way to illustrate your data if you want to support a table and to really tell a story about a particular variable or a couple of variables together. Because what you should be doing is looking at your data in a table, and then for anything that looks very, very interesting, of course, we know a picture is worth 1,000 words. Even if you're still showing that data in a table, if you pull out the most interesting finding in there and put it in a picture, everybody's eye is going to be drawn to that. And so you can very much make an impact just by highlighting that in a chart. But you want to choose the right chart for your data. All right.
All right. So we've talked about survey design, survey questions, and types of graphs. What we wanted to do is also offer up that you don't have to spend tons of money on expensive software to analyze your data. If you have the Excel or the Microsoft Suite, Excel does a lot of the functionality of data or descriptive statistics. And so when we get into the practice part, before we let you go free and practice on your own, what we wanted to do is give you some steps on making sure that if you have the most recent Microsoft Excel suite, that you've turned on the descriptive, the data analysis tool in your in Excel, because then it'll just spit out the information for you, and that is what we want you to do. So these are the steps. We'll show you them in a second. So this stuff might not make sense, but what we wanted to do is take you on a little journey of a case study. We were going to provide some information in Excel, and then we're going to walk you through how we got the information. Because what is the point of telling you all of this if you're not able to actually apply the information? And since both Michelle and I are educators, we want to make sure that you have the tools to be successful if we're not with you. So what we thought it would be helpful is to identify a grant, because in most cases, you're collecting data in order to apply for grants or to continue to collect grant money. So we've identified a Florida Department of Education grant that is asking you to, or making funds available to fund programming, training. And so what you want to do is do an inventory of your already collected data, because sometimes you don't need to, as Michelle pointed out earlier, recreate the wheel. If you already have the data, then the important part will be to analyze it to see if it fits the ask of the grant. Now, if you see that it doesn't, and it would be pretty much of a reach, then you might need to collect additional data as long as it meets the time requirements for you to be able to submit the grant. So here, this grant is asking you to present information regarding entrepreneurship training projects. They are trying to fund innovative, really creative ways to do training for your given populations. So you need to, again, identify the data, and this is key because the data tells the story in your grant application. So you need to make sure that, again, you have collected the information that will help you tell the best story to get this. I think it was $150,000 pool of money. And we all know in education, we need additional funding. So your data helps you tell the story in order to validate or affirm why you are the best steward of the money. So if you are in the need of collecting more data, then we want you to make sure that you're using the pieces of information about making sure your research design, your research questions are going to help you collect the information in order to get this grant funding. So we're going to take you, before we go to the actual data part, it's really important too that when you write a successful grant, you are the data collection part and typically is in the implementation or the evaluation. So you're telling the story of you want to provide this service to your community, or you are installing something different or new in the community, or you're in the initial stages of implementing the idea. And so this grant money will help fund that. Or if you've already fully implemented it, then you could be in your grant application really assessing the success of it or the lessons learned, and the grant money will help you continue the good work that you're already doing. Or in some cases, you've already implemented it, you've already assessed the effectiveness, and now it's time to scale. And the grant money will close the gap in terms of being able to scale up. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Actually, I'm just going to add this. How fun. So, okay, let me give you some contextual information about this sample data. And it's already in the chat, so if you want to download it and follow along with me, it might make a little sense. So what we have here as sample data, remember that the case or the grant application in this case study is asking to fund educational training opportunities. So what you're looking at are the state, SUS, state university system colleges and universities who have different types of training programs. And for the data, we will be focusing on the co-op training. So our sample data is going to look at how many co-op trainings does a university have in order to tell a story of collaboration for the purpose of this discussion? So your organization could identify one of these institutions as a good collaborator to either implement, install, or scale up a pre-existing program. So for instance, some of the schools do not have a co-op training. So this might be an opportunity for you to collaborate with them. So that would be an installation. So it would be doing something new. And so in your grant application, you're going to tell the story about, you know, regionally why this would be helpful and how you would be able to implement it and how you would be able to evaluate it. Or you could take the strategic position of going with an institution who has several programs, and you're joining in with them to support their community outreach, because every university and college has a commitment for community outreach. So when you go into, this is an example of how the data will populate in Excel. So once you, and I'll show you the steps in a second, but this shows you the mean. Oh, yes, Rachel, go ahead.
Just define for me, what is co-op training? Because I'm seeing my own college on there, so I'm very interested in knowing. I just don't understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, so thank you for clarifying or asking that question. So co-ops could really mean a lot of different things for schools, but traditionally what that means is that there's some vocational training in addition to their academic learning. So it could be an apprenticeship, it could be internships, it could be work to or school to work pipeline types of programs. So it's really specific on how the institution defines it. And they might lump all of those categories together under the umbrella of co-op. So it's usually connected to some type of additional training to create a pipeline for the workforce.
So like at Valencia College, it would be our continuing education program?
It could be, well, it depends if their co-ops are student facing or employee facing. So I think based on this data, it's student facing. So it would be more like internships, apprenticeships. It could be the GED vocational training. So it really depends on how your institution defines it. And with Valencia, I'm thinking it would be maybe the vocational training programs. But I would look, and we can look actually when we take a break or into the on your own time to double check. Okay, so what we did is we went ahead and already assessed the sample data for you. So as Michelle mentioned, the mean for this would be the average number of training programs for all of the universities. And you'll see in some cases, really, there are a lot of zeros. And so what Michelle was saying earlier is that these zeros actually skew the data a little bit. So in this case, well, it says the median is 0 because there are more zeros, more non-participating schools than schools that have the training. So you might want to say, okay, well, which school out of this data or this sample do you want to partner with? And you could either go with the one that has the most programs, which would be the University of Florida, it looks like, or a school that is in the beginning stages, which would be potentially Palm Beach. So it really depends, but it helps give you some contextual information about how do you want to leverage your idea based on the data that you have in order to tell the story of this, of why you are the best steward for the grant. So if you want to download the sample data, we can walk you through step by step. And once you save it to your computer, the data analysis add-in will stay there. So then you won't have to follow these steps again, but you also have the steps for your records. So if I could get someone to tell me ready, then I'll go.
I'm ready, I think.
Okay. All right. So once you have the spreadsheet open, go to your Files tab in the top left corner.
Mhm.
Then scroll down to Options, and it should be green if you have the latest version of Excel. And then select Options.
Mine isn't even giving me something that says options.
Scroll all the way to the bottom.
Properties?
If you select File here,
Mm-hmm.
and what version of Excel do you have?
Who knows?
Is it
It might be.
I want to say this is the 2019 version that I have. So does your Excel look like this on your screen, Rachel?
Mine is version 16.60 2022. That's what.
Okay. So then your directions might be slightly different. But if you scroll down, do you see any of these options at all on your screen?
Okay, hold on. I think that might be in a different spot. Let me go. Excel, about Excel.
The options should be where you save in files. No. Okay. So I don't have a later version of Excel, but what I can do is when we go to the practice on your own, Rachel, we can work on finding the instructions for a later version. Like I said, I think this is either the 2019 or the 2020 version of the Microsoft Suite. But the add-in, I want to say, is available on later versions, but I can double check.
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking through all of it to see if I can see, options. But I just don't see it.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to show?
Yeah. So then once you go to File, you'll scroll down to Options. And here in the add-in section, you will go down to Excel add-ins, hit OK. Oops, but because I already have it on the analysis tool package already there. So let me see if it'll let me do it again. So select the analysis tool pack, and then make sure you hit go. Select the analysis tool pack, and then OK. And then we're good to go. So those instructions are on the left to make sure that you can do the analysis on instructions on the right. So you will go up to data. Now data on your data ribbon, the data analysis will be there. So you would select data analysis, descriptive statistics, and the screenshots are in the spreadsheet. So if I'm moving too fast, you'll be able to follow along, at least with the screenshot. And then you would select OK. Then it's going to ask you to select which cells. And this is really important. When you are selecting the input range, you can only select numbers. So this header in co-op training, you will get an error message. So it's important that you're only selecting all of the numbers. And so you might actually, before you get to this point, you might actually remove all of the institutions with 0. So you're only focusing on schools that have programs, or you can look at schools who only have programs 50 or more. So it really depends on what you're looking for and how you want to analyze this data. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to select them all. And then it tells you here that it's what the range is. And then you're going to go down and select where you want the output. So the results, which we already showed you on this other tab, where you want it to end up. So for some people, you could want it to put it on a different sheet. For me, because I don't want to confuse myself, I like to put the output in the same worksheet rather than a different worksheet. So then I can go back and spot check to see if the information is right. So then you would select where you want it to go, and then hit OK, and then it will spit out what we already showed you on the previous tab. So this is what it would shoot out. And then from here, you will start your analysis to start putting in information into your grant. Now, Michelle is going to also show you some steps. So if you don't, for whatever reason, want to use this type of descriptive statistics, Michelle is going to show you another strategy in Excel to use pivot tables, which are a dynamic tool to quickly count your information, your data, but also display it in a way that can be filtered. So then once you have your pivot table, you can do some of the things that I was talking about with, okay, maybe you don't want to see any of the schools that don't have zeros, and you can see which schools have 50. So it'll be able to show you this information in a very quick table. But before we go there, any questions about generating the descriptive results here? Other than we need to identify which version we're the options are on your custom ribbon.
It's just really to know that Excel has this capacity, that this can be pulled out from Excel. That's great.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say before I don't want to forget this, there are whole YouTube channels to show you how dynamic and powerful Excel is based on what version you have. So YouTube, I'm blanking on the 2 channels that I usually watch when I want to do things like dynamic dashboards or really fancy pivot tables or just gut checking if I use the right graph. So I can, while we're again in the practice on your own portion. I can also drop those links in because they're saved. But Michelle, you were going to jump in and say something.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe after we look at the pivot table and the graph, Rachel could share her screen and we could see what her Excel looks like. I am helpless unless I can take a look at it. Yeah. The nice thing though with pivot tables and graphs is I believe this comes pre-loaded into Excel. You don't have to activate any particular add-ins. So do you want me to just talk through it?
Yeah, and you can actually, I think I can give you control too.
Okay, if not, I can just share the copy that I have.
Okay. Is this showing up for you, the pivot table right now?
Yeah, I can see the screenshots. Yeah.
Okay.
So I really like pivot tables to generate tables because you don't have to go through the steps of generating the statistics and then putting them in a table yourself. So it saves a ton of time. Even if you end up formatting the pivot table, which I always tell my students they have to do, don't just copy and paste this raw thing into a report. It still saves so much time than typing it in yourself. So we're still using the co-op training data. And so what we have is our list of colleges and then the number of co-op programs that they have. And so I want to create a summary table showing me the number of programs by school, which we already have. But I also want to look at the percent, just what percent of all co-op programs does each school have? Well, I could write a formula and drag that down the next column and calculate that and get it into a table. And that may take just as much time as doing the pivot table for this, but imagine you want to add in additional ways of looking at that, and it just it then becomes a lot of work to do it manually. So if you click inside the range of the data that you want to include in the pivot table, and then go up to, oh, yeah, there it goes. I don't know if it was just frozen on my screen. So you can highlight it, or in my more recent version of Excel, I'm able to just click somewhere in the range and go up to insert and then select pivot table. And you can also see that in the screenshot. You can choose from table/range, which is going to let you select the range of data that you want to include in your table. And there's just a little bit of a delay with what Lynell is doing and when I can see it. So, so go ahead and click from table/range. And this is where you are able to select the range of data that you want to include in your table. And so since Lynell already highlighted all of it, the two columns that we want, it has already captured the data that we want. And so you can choose, again, just like the descriptive statistics, to drop the pivot table into your existing spreadsheet, or you can put it in a new spreadsheet it'll create. It's your preference. It doesn't matter at all. And so, yes, there we go. So then when you create the pivot table, then it will give you a blank rectangle that says this is your pivot table. So you have to click in that rectangle, which it just isn't showing that way right now, since I already did a little bit of playing around with this, but it'll bring up this pivot table field. And in this box, this is where you can choose what you want to include in your table and how you'd like it to display. So you can either click the little box, the little check box next to the variables in the top part of the table, or you can also drag them down into the one of 4 boxes at the bottom. And I usually just do it that way because in my head I see how I'd like my table displayed. So I dragged college down to the rows to put them in the rows. And then I first dragged co-op training down to the values field. And that meant that I was going to see the total number of co-op training programs per college, just like we expected to see. And so that's halfway there. Now I want to add the percents. So if you want to remove that field, Lynell, we'll just re-add it so they can see how I did it, if you don't mind. So you see that percent column went away. So to get that column, I dragged the co-op training variable to the values box again and dropped it in there. And now you see it's just showing us the same data that we have in the first column. So if you select the drop-down menu and go to value field settings, you can choose how the data will display. And I want to show values as, so if you click on the little tab there, okay, I want to show it as a percent of the column total. And I just want to touch on this very briefly. So you want to, you very rarely ever want to use percent of grand total. But if you think about this as percent of column total, it's the same thing as manually adding up all of the programs and then individually saying the number of co-op trainings for Broward County divided by the total number of trainings. And your column then will add up to 100% when you include all of the colleges. And so I actually want to look at the number format in a different way. You can do it this way too. Just hit OK. Okay, so now we have our total number and then the percent of that column, the column total. So like Lynell was showing you, you can select the way the number displays through the box when you are adding these columns. But let's say you didn't really know how you wanted it to display, but now we're looking at it and we have way too many decimal places. So you can highlight the range of values. Would you highlight the percents? Thank you. And we want to reduce the number of decimal places down to just whole numbers. So if you go back to the home, well, I want to show, do you ever do it from the home menu and you just hit the button to reduce the number of decimal places? It's really quick. I like this a lot. Let me see where it is on yours. Okay, so under number, you see where it says percentage, and you see under that, you have 2 little icons that say number. If you click out of that drop-down menu, and you have, no, just cancel out of that.
Okay.
Okay, so see the 2 little boxes under that? a by number and you have an arrow with decimal places. So down on the next little, yeah, those. So you can increase the decimal places and then you can decrease them. And so just decrease them until we don't have any decimal places. So everything's just a whole number. So
I learned something new.
It's so easy that way. It saves
Yeah.
lots of clicking. And so you can, and so similarly, if we highlight the sum of co-op training of the other column, we can control the number of decimal places that we have there also. And if you click the comma or that apostrophe, you should get to, well, you have to, you get commas for the thousands. And then you just have to play with the decimal places after that. But you can personalize it to look the way you would like it to appear in your report. Now, you can copy and paste this into a Word document, and you can change the name of the columns so it makes sense when someone's looking at that. But you can see that once you've done this, you can boop, 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 do this very quickly and saves a ton of time. And so you can input a chart this way too, a graph. So if we go to the next tab, and those were screenshots from my version of Excel. So it might look a little different on yours, Rachel's, I don't know. But you can just graph directly from your pivot table. So what I did on this tab for illustration purposes was I recreated the pivot table we just looked at, except I only looked at the included the percent column. And I thought, okay, so I want to build a bar graph from that because I'm looking at proportions. So all I do is click somewhere in the data that I want to include. And I went to insert, and let's see if yours looks the same as mine. And I just inserted the bar chart. So that first, that column chart there, and produced my graph. And then you can personalize the way that looks, modify it, change the title, change the way the x-axis displays. So you can change the angle of the schools. You can remove the legend, because in this graph you don't really need it. You can change the axes, the values of those. You can add data labels. And just click around and explore. You can't break it. You can see everything that it's capable of. You can also change the colors here of the way it displays. And so there is more that you can do with this, but it's just an intro to it. So it'll get you started, and then you can click around the pivot table options also and just see all of the different ways it allows you to display your data. But it is a time saver. So, and like Lynell said, there's tons of videos on YouTube that explain how to really capitalize on the more advanced features of pivot tables. But very helpful.
I'll be honest with you, Bryce.
So I think that was the end of the data tutorial.
Yep. So what I'm going to do is actually stop recording here so that we can just go into the Q&A, because this part might not be helpful to anyone else because everything else is in the presentation.
Right. Now is the time we would have allowed, or we will allow our participants to work on data if they would like to, or play around with the sample data And we encourage anyone watching the recording to do that and email us if you have any questions. So